Hi, I am editing this paper for Alexandra Anderson, and it's titled The Democratic Deficit in the European Union. And essentially, her paper is about how citizens in the EU feel that they suffer from a lack of democracy, leading to a democratic deficit that the EU has yet to find a solution to. She first starts off explaining what the word democracy means, and she does this by introducing a scholar whose name is Robert A. Dow, and he studies democratization, and then she explains these three different waves that the author refers to in the transformation of democracy, and how they work and why they work. And then she explains the waves briefly and how they worked and why they worked in the past. And then she mentions how a fourth wave is coming about that streams from the case inside the EU about the governmental and political issues. She then touches on some of the ways citizens feel unrepresented by their government and why they feel this way. She uses the European Parliament as an example of how the members are directly elected through citizens of the European Union. Then she starts to talk about the ways the EU has tried to fix the democratic deficit through treaties that gives more power to the European Parliament. The Maastricht Treaty, don't think I said that right, which gave more say to the Parliament in decision making, and the Treaty of Amsterdam, which gave the Parliament the right to approve the Commission President, essentially making it more transparent. She then gives a breakdown of the articles in the treaty that give this power to the Parliament. So, some different sections. She briefly states them, talks about how they how they work and what they've done in the EU and what kind of policies they've changed and created. And then she briefly talks about how none of these treaties have made the Parliament representative of the people yet. She then mentions the Treaty of Nice and the Treaty of Lisbon and breaks down the ways that these treaties have tried to combat the democratic deficit, but how these treaties have also fell short. When she talks about the Treaty of Nice, she talks about how it increased the legislative and superiority powers that the Parliament had, and it also extended the qualified majority voting to new subjects, which furthered Parliament's role in the co-decision process with the Council. So the co-decision thing was a really big deal for the Parliament and their power. And then within the Treaty of Lisbon, she talks about how the purpose was to make the European Union more democratic because of the issues within the member states and how the citizens felt their democracy was being held by their government, and how this treaty set out to enforce a more efficient way to address global problems under one voice, and that the citizens' initiative was also a major change that came from the Treaty of Lisbon, and it allowed them to participate directly in developing policies in the European Union through an online forum. And then she talks about some of the articles in the treaty and what they say, and gets into the specifics of exactly what they mean for the citizens. She talks about Article 8A, which mentions the functions of the Union that shall be founded on a representative democracy, and other things like that, that the citizens will have the right to participate in the democratic life of the Union, and all of these other things. And then and then she briefly mentions how also these treaties have tried to combat the democratic deficit, but have also fell short, like the other things within the other things that she mentioned, the other treaties and articles. And then lastly, she mentions voter turnout in 2009 and 2014. And she talks about how her historically low voter turnout rates. She adds some statistics in here which back up her idea about the democratic deficit. There's a lot of information in here with numbers, so it tells us exactly what's going on, and and then she closes with just summarizing everything that she's talked about in her paper. So for as far as paper suggestions go, I think it was well organized and with topic headings, and it was easy to read, and it's an interesting topic. I noticed that in the thesis it reads, the results of these failings by member nations and their citizens is the democratic deficit that the EU has been experiencing for far too long and have yet to find a true solution. I think it would be nice and helpful if you kind of reworked that and mention the word feelings that you talk about in a specific way, so that if someone was just reading your thesis without the rest of the sentences above it, they would know exactly what your paper is about. Because I don't think feelings is that specific, even though I knew what you were talking about because I read the rest of it. But I think it would be beneficial to add that to the thesis. So if it was to just be pulled out or just read alone, it would be really easy to know what your paper is going to be about and what you're going to talk about. Next, I have, I see where you were discussing the different waves of the transformation of democracy, and I don't know how relevant that is in the context that you use it, but I think you could probably find a way to connect it to the EU, the other three, not the fourth one that you mentioned, because the fourth one you did say that it connects directly to the EU because it came about because of the things that because of the things that are going on. So if you could find a way, I think it would be more relevant and more beneficial. And if not, I would honestly just use the fourth one, because I don't know how beneficial and like relevant and necessary the other three are to the point of your paper. I don't think it's really like driving the main point home. Also, I would dig for more sources to back up your argument. The one author that you used seemed to be great, and the other online sources that you used, I would just look for more like academic articles and things like that just to be safe. I think that you wanted to use APA format in your paper, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would make sure that you double check your in-text citations and your bibliography. You can just Google like Purdue OWL APA in-text citations and bibliography and find the right way to do it. That's what I did. Another thing, just for like formatting purposes, your fifth paragraph, I believe, it's a little long, so I would break that up when you switch the ideas. I think a good place to do that is when you start to introduce the treaties that you're going to talk about. That would be a good way to transition and break up those ideas so the paragraph isn't like super long. Also, when you look for other potential sources, it might be interesting to see if you can find some things or like some newspaper articles or some journals or something written by EU citizens, or just something showing expressions about how they feel, and adding a section of, just so I can help you out with like figuring out some to add some length to your paper when you have to go back and fix it. I think that will add a lot to your paper. Some other source ideas would be to find people with opposing views. I know that that's one of the things that he mentioned to me during my when he read my outline, is that to find opposing views, to find people that don't necessarily have the same ideas that you do. I think that would be helpful and add something to yours because it added to mine. Authors who talk about how the democratic deficit is truly affecting people, like socially and economically. What social aspects is it affecting? What economic aspects is it affecting? I think that'd be a really interesting thing to add.